40 years ago, Venezuela had South America's richest economy, powered by oil wealth that built skyscrapers and imported luxury cars. But today, hyperinflation, hunger, and mass migration define its reality. How did the world's top exporter of crude, with 3.7 million barrels a day, end up here? The answer reveals a tragic fall from grace, and it begins long before the country's famous crisis years. Oil transformed Venezuela almost overnight. In the 1920s, the country vaulted to become the world's second-largest oil exporter, trailing only the United States. By 1970, wells across the Maracaibo basin and the Orinoco belt were pumping 3.7 million barrels a day, fueling a wave of prosperity that outpaced most of Latin America. The skyline of Caracas filled with new towers and imported goods lined store shelves. The country's per capita income soared, drawing workers from across the region. When the OPEC embargo struck in 1973, global oil prices shot up fourfold. Venezuela's government suddenly found itself with an extra $10 billion in revenue almost overnight. Oil accounted for over 90% of export earnings, and the bolivar grew so strong that other sectors, agriculture, manufacturing, even tourism, were left behind. This single-minded focus on oil brought luxury and status, but it also meant that nearly every paycheck, every public project, and every hope for the future depended on the price of crude. The riches were real, but so was the risk. As Venezuela's fortunes rose with oil, the seeds of future trouble were quietly taking root. On January 1, 1976, Venezuela's government took full control of the oil industry, the law reserving to the state. The industry and commerce of hydrocarbons swept away the last foreign concessions, creating PDVSA as a state-run oil giant. For a generation, the promise of nationalization was simple. Oil would now fund schools, highways, and social programs for all. But as the years passed, cracks began to appear beneath the surface. The revenues of PDVSA soared, and public spending rose, while corruption quietly siphoned billions from state coffers. By the late 1980s, falling oil prices exposed how fragile the prosperity really was. On February 27, 1989, anger spilled into the streets of Caracas. A hike in bus fares triggered the Caracazo, an explosion of protests and looting that spread across the capital and left hundreds, possibly thousands, dead. The official death toll stood at 300, but eyewitness accounts and rights groups put the number far higher. For many Venezuelans, this was a turning point, a violent reckoning with inequality and broken promises. Discontent with the old order simmered, setting the stage for sweeping political changes that would soon rewrite the country's future. By the early 1990s, Venezuela faced a crossroads. Oil production was slipping, public finances were stretched thin, and the state-run PDVSA struggled to keep up with rising costs and aging infrastructure. The government's answer was the Apertura Petrolera, or oil opening, a series of reforms that invited foreign investment back into the sector for the first time since nationalization. But the arrangement was far from a simple sell-off. Instead, the core of the industry remained under state control. Every joint venture, from the Orinoco Belt's Petrozuata project to new exploration fields, required direct congressional approval. Contracts spelled out the rules. PDVSA, or its subsidiaries, held the majority stake, while foreign partners provided capital and technical expertise. In the 1997 Petrozuata agreement, for example, Maraven, a PDVSA affiliate, retained a controlling interest, and the deal's fine print capped the partnership at 30 years, with all output sold back to PDVSA. Foreign firms could not claim ownership of reserves or production. Their role was strictly defined as operators, not concession holders. Even the fiscal regime favored the state. While contractors enjoyed lower taxes and some deductions for high-cost, heavy oil extraction, the government still set the terms and collected royalties. Critics on both sides argued over whether these joint ventures amounted to privatization, but the contracts themselves reveal a more complex reality. The state never relinquished its grip on the industry's commanding heights. Instead, it used carefully structured agreements to attract outside investment without ceding ultimate control, an uneasy compromise that would soon come under fire from workers and politicians alike. On December 2, 2002, Venezuela's oil industry ground to a halt. Opposition leaders called a nationwide strike, and thousands of PDVSA managers, engineers, and even tanker captains walked off the job. Oil production dropped to a third of normal levels as tankers sat anchored in Lake Maracaibo, refusing to move. The government responded with force. Over the next few weeks, President Hugo Chavez ordered the dismissal of striking executives. By early 2003, the purge swept through the company, reaching deep into its technical core. In total, 18,000 employees, nearly half the workforce, were fired, from refinery operators to geologists who had spent decades maintaining the country's most valuable asset. The consequences were immediate and severe. With so many experienced hands gone, PDVSA's technical capacity collapsed. Maintenance schedules fell behind, safety checks were skipped, and critical knowledge left with the engineers who had built the system from the inside out. Oil output lagged, and the company lost billions in unsold crude. In the years that followed, PDVSA was rebuilt not as a merit-based enterprise, but as a political tool. Loyalty to the government became the new hiring standard. Rafael Ramirez, a trusted Chavez ally, took the helm and began diverting oil revenues into off-budget funds like Fonden, bypassing traditional oversight and accountability. A former PDVSA engineer later recalled that firing the experts was like cutting out the company's brain. The loss of institutional knowledge would haunt the industry for years, leaving Venezuela's oil giant exposed to every price shock and technical setback that lay ahead. Oil prices tumbled from over $100 a barrel in 2014 to just $40 a barrel within 2 years. For a country where oil supplied nearly every dollar in the budget, the shock was catastrophic. Government revenue evaporated and the bolivar lost its anchor. As output from PDVSA's aging fields slipped below 800,000 barrels per day, down from more than 3 million at the turn of the century, the economy unraveled at record speed. By 2018, inflation soared past 1 million%, turning paychecks into worthless scraps of paper almost overnight. GDP shrank by 3/4 between 2014 and 2021, a collapse on a scale rarely seen outside of wartime. Supermarket shelves emptied, and basic medicine all but vanished. The numbers told the story with brutal clarity. A nation that once rivaled the wealthiest in Latin America now faced the world's fastest shrinking economy. Behind every data point, the consequences of years of mismanagement and unchecked dependence on oil became impossible to ignore. The collapse was not just a matter of lost revenue, it was a breakdown of the economic order itself. 7 million Venezuelans have left their homeland since 2015, the largest exodus in Latin America's modern history. Families once rooted for generations in cities like Maracaibo or the hillsides of Caracas now cross borders on foot, carrying little more than a change of clothes and a phone for remittances. The World Food Program reports that nearly 1 in 3 Venezuelans faces food insecurity, and more than half of all households can no longer afford a basic diet. Stories echo across the region. A mother in Cucuta recalls skipping meals so her children could eat, while her husband sends what little he earns back home in bolivares that lose value by the week. Sanctions layered on top of years of mismanagement have deepened the crisis. United States restrictions in 2017 and 2019 choked off oil revenue, pushing PDVSA's output to historic lows. By 2023, a brief easing allowed exports to climb 12% and brought a flicker of recovery. GDP grew by 5%, and remittances became a lifeline for millions. But hopes for stability faded when sanctions returned in 2024, tied to disputed elections. The cycle of hardship continues, leaving a country once defined by abundance, now shaped by absence of neighbors, of food, of certainty about tomorrow. Today, Venezuela holds the world's largest oil reserves, yet most citizens face severe shortages and staggering inflation. As resource-rich nations weigh their futures, Venezuela stands as a warning, because mismanaged wealth can become poverty overnight. The fate of millions hinges on choices made now, not yesterday. Share your perspective below.